Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here for you for the last time in 2022. This is going to be the F1 season review. As you know, I like to do these unscripted fairly, and just it's more like a casual chat and reflection on the year that has been in Formula One on and off the track. It was obviously a big year because we came into this new era of technical regulations. They were delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic over to 2022. And also coming off the end of last year where we had that controversial finish in Abu Dhabi as well. A lot of questions needed to be answered or were left unanswered by the FIA. So there was a lot coming into this year. And, while we have had like a one-way championship, you got to say, with Red Bull and Max Verstappen winning in the end quite comfortably. I think it's been a pretty decent year overall when you look at all the other permutations and how the regulations have kind of changed the shape of the field. So, why not just start from the top and talk about the Red Bull racing team, talk about Max Verstappen as well. There was a lot of expectation, coming out of last year, going into a title decider, whether, given the development that they've done in the lead up or the development that they were focusing on last year, would they have been able to hit the ground running this year? And, at the start of the year, it obviously looked a bit shaky. There was 2 retirements and 3 races for Verstappen, with reliability problems. Sergio Perez as well. Bahrain was a disaster as far as Red Bull were concerned there for the first race of the season, and both cars failing to see the checkered flag. But then from there, really, Max has kind of been faultless and, peerless as well. Lowest finish, I think, all season apart from those DNFs that he had in Bahrain and in Melbourne was 7th overall, so that's doing pretty good considering, he's winning races left, right and centre. He set the record for most wins in a season as well, eclipsing that Sebastian Vettel and Michael Schumacher record of 13 wins, so it's going to take a lot of beating again next season. And then for Red Bull as well, first Constructors' Championship since 2013. A lot of criticism yet still about Sergio Perez and, how he just can't be as quick as Max, or he's not the best second driver. Say what you will about him, I think he's still done a pretty decent job. He's not, A-class driver, if you want to call it. I'd probably rank him as a B grade for this year, but he has done pretty well in terms of supporting Max where he can. And then, of course, that flashpoint in Brazil where the roles were reversed and Max was needing to support him but didn't get that support in the end. And also, it didn't make a difference come Abu Dhabi because Leclerc just had more points. And even on countback of wins, Leclerc had Perez covered. So it's some of those little inconsistencies on Perez's side that has hurt him a little bit. There's no way he's ever going to beat Verstappen in equal machinery. That's just a given. But, for Red Bull to miss out on what could have been an ultra-dominant year with 1-2 in the championship as well as a Constructors' title win, I think, they're going to be looking back at that and analysing where Perez could have done a bit better because, to be honest, some of the races where his qualifying was, he made it really difficult for himself in qualifying, which was something that was talked about last year as well. But then at the same time, he pulled off 2 wins at 2 very, very difficult street circuits in Monaco and Singapore. Say what you want about Monaco. Are they, that clued on to say, is the driver that clued on to say, I'm going to crash so I can win the race tomorrow even though I'm starting 3rd? You would have to really map it out, if you have got some kind of Palantir or whatever to look into the future, you'd be able to figure that out. But, if there is some kind of internal squabble over that, then, let it be. It'll work itself out, I'm sure. Next year will be quite interesting, particularly with Red Bull having Daniel Ricciardo back in the fold as well as a third driver, even though it's more of an ambassadorial kind of thing from what we hear. But, I'm sure there will be some pressure put on Perez as well in that. And while we're on that subject of, bringing out a red flag in qualifying, why don't they just change the rule? I'm sure everyone is saying the same thing. Or just implement a rule that says if you trigger a red flag in qualifying, you get your lap deleted, your fastest lap taken away or whatever. So they do that in the Supercars Championship, of course. So, there's no reason why they couldn't do it in F1 because, again, in Brazil, we saw George Russell benefit from that when he started close to the front of the grid in the qualifying session, then went on to win the sprint, and then, of course, winning the Grand Prix. And we'll talk about Mercedes a little bit later. Have I waxed lyrical about Red Bull and Verstappen enough yet? And Perez as well as a whole? Probably, but also not. I just want to highlight quickly some of my favourite drives, I guess, for Verstappen this year. Hungary and Belgium in particular, where he did start further down the grid and kind of just made his way to the front. That's where car and driver were really intertwined and in that sweet spot. But then also highlighting kind of the early part of the season as well, coming off that DNF in Australia, to then go on and dominate the weekend in Imola in Ferrari's backyard with a sprint race as well. Then also Miami and Barcelona too, where Ferrari, they demonstrated how good they were in qualifying. Red Bull had to work and Verstappen had to work for those wins early on. So to come out of the first half of the season that strong showed you the strengths on the Red Bull side, but then on the Ferrari side, it showed you their weaknesses. And when you look at Baku, that point in the season, where it was looking all fine and dandy for Leclerc, pole fastest lap win in Bahrain, pole fastest lap win in Australia, just missing out on the win in the second round as well, to then Barcelona, mechanical failure, Azerbaijan, mechanical failure, but having pole position for those 4 races, they were quick, but just couldn't stitch together a race. There was, strategic issues on the pit wall. They couldn't decide what they were doing strategy-wise. Then, of course, the reliability as well became an issue. And then when they found some consistency in terms of just being reliable, the pace wasn't there. They were third quickest car in most instances and slipping behind Mercedes, who came into the season so far behind Red Bull and Ferrari that it was a miracle that they'd be even able to challenge for podiums. So, that's where it all kind of fell apart for them. Silverstone as well kind of was one of those races where as much as I was really happy for Carlos Sainz and to get his first win and to get it in a Ferrari as well is probably one of the best things that can happen to you in Formula One. From a championship perspective, what were Ferrari doing where they didn't pit Leclerc for the soft tyres because he was exposed and left to finish 4th in the end, not even on the podium. So given that Verstappen finished the race in 7th, it would have been a great race for them to claw back some points. He did bounce back in Austria though, and then France could have been, France was kind of the Sebastian Vettel Germany 2018 moment where he made the mistake at his, quasi-home race, you could say, Monegasque, French. I don't know if you could count that as a home race for Leclerc, but it was from a position where he could have easily won, got 25 points in the bank, 26 with the fastest lap, but instead it went the way of Verstappen, also the start of a 5-race winning streak for the Dutchman. So, from there, the rest of the season for Leclerc really didn't matter as much. I mean, yeah, he had pole in Monza and Singapore, and he was on the podium as well for a number of those races. But, the difficult thing with Ferrari is, and people have been debating endlessly about this given the now sacking of Mattia Binotto, or sacked or resigned, whatever you want to say. We've all seen The Godfather, haven't we? We all know how that all plays out. So as much as you can say that this was a successful season for Ferrari, given the fact that the last 2 years they've not been able to win a race, and then they've finished second in the championship, which has been the best finish. And I apologise for the barking in the background. That is little Lulu, a rescue poodle that we've just adopted this week. So she's still kind of getting used to hearing other dogs around, not in our place, but the neighbours and everything too. So yes, welcome Lulu to our little family here. Probably one of the best things that have happened to us this year. So where was I? Leclerc and Ferrari. Given where they were the last 2 years, and also something I said 2 years in 2020 is that, we need to afford Ferrari the time to be able to get into a title winning position. We can't be so brutal, even though I am quite brutal, because the expectation's there for them to win. That if they really want to transform themselves into a modern Formula One team, and to be a sharp organisation like a Red Bull and Mercedes, who, let's be fair, since 2010, it's been those two teams that have won all the championships. So that is a long, long time, 12 years, 13 years or whatever, that we've had dominance from those two teams. And Ferrari really just can't seem to get it right in this modern era. And, the fact that, again, they've resorted to sacking a team boss is like, well, here we go again. What's going to happen this time? That's probably just the cynical side of the situation I see. At the time when Binotto did replace Maurizio Arrivabene, I did think that was not a good decision anyway, given that Binotto was more of a technical guru. He had done so well on the engine side of things, and becoming the technical chief as well of the team, overseeing the design of the car. That was more his forte. I didn't think that, leading the team perhaps was his strong suit. And that's what we kind of saw unravel this year, given all the mistakes that they made, and the accountability wasn't there for the rest of the team. And when I talk about, making people accountable, it doesn't mean, you got to sack them for making a mistake. It's about how can you learn from this and move on and do better next time. That's probably what happens in organizations like Red Bull and Mercedes and whatnot, is where the staff and people are empowered to be able to, learn from their mistakes and develop. But given the disconnect between, Ferrari, the race team, and then also the board now headed up by John Elkann and Benedetto Vigna, I think, is the new CEO who's replaced Louis Camilleri. They've just decided to not really empower their team principle whatsoever. So hopefully now with Frederick Vasseur coming in, which was confirmed as part of a big team principal, team boss merry-go-round that we had last week, which I'll talk about a bit later, we can see that empowerment come, because if not, it's just going to be a doomed, never-ending cycle of, sacking a team boss if they don't do well, and then, start over again. And how would it be for the drivers too? Like, Leclerc's never going to win a championship if they don't get their act together. And for Carlos Sainz as well, is it really the kind of environment you want to be in? Yes, you're driving a Ferrari, but, poison chalice is a poison chalice. Just ask the likes of Alan Prost, Fernando Alonso, or maybe don't ask Fernando Alonso because he didn't really make many good decisions after that. But for the likes of Alan Prost, to go there, things not to work out, but, he's still four-time world champion because he's won with McLaren, he's won with Williams. It's just, for whatever reason, things just don't work out at Ferrari. So, until Ferrari can find a way to adapt to being a modern team and adopting these modern values, I don't think that they're going to be in contention at all. We probably need to forget about them being there. They'll be like second best, third best, but don't get your hopes up for a Ferrari championship win anytime soon. And with a new team principal as well, what does that do? Does that, reset their mindset of, okay, well, now we've got to wait another year or two for a championship because we've got to let, Fred settle in and, systems, procedures, yada, yada, and then, and then go for the title. So it's excuse after excuse, and there's no real progress being shown. I mean, this year, genuinely, there was progress in the last 2 years, coming out of 2 winless seasons and being in a position to actually fight for race wins, and overall were the quickest car on occasion. But, it's the execution side that's really let them down. And, that's where, I would have given Binotto another year to get his act together with the team, and then made a decision at the end of 2023 whether he'd be the right person to carry on for them. So yeah, that's enough about Ferrari. Let's talk about Mercedes and the fall from their supremacy of the last 8 years of Constructors' Championship glory and Drivers' Championship glory as well for Lewis Hamilton. And considering where they started the year as well, I think to then come into the final race in Abu Dhabi with a sniff of potentially finishing second ahead of Ferrari, it's a pretty good job, and I know they won't be satisfied because they weren't in the hunt, but to have the consistency that they did in the middle part of the season from Hamilton's side was incredible. Like, I kind of wrote him off early, saying, that maybe he's finished, but also saying, look, maybe he won't win another title, but he can definitely continue to win races and keep Mercedes at the front moving forwards. But given the form that we've seen in through the middle of the season and then towards the end of the season too, with all the second place finishes that he's had, I can't wait to see what Mercedes do next year. I mean, George Russell really emerged, in those opening races. He was the top Mercedes driver quite consistently. He had those run of top 5 finishes until the big crash at Silverstone with Zhou Guanyu, which was unfortunate. Thankfully, he was okay, but he's finished no lower than 14th, I think, when in Singapore. So that was kind of the worst race that he had, but he's been quite consistent. And then to get the one and only win for Mercedes as well this season, and of course his maiden win in F1, it was a matter of time moving to a team like Mercedes and getting the win. But for Hamilton, first winless season in F1, that record is now no longer with him, unfortunately. Who else is going to... there's no one else on the grid with that record currently, so we'll have to wait till some new young gun comes in and gets to win from the get-go. Maybe Oscar Piastri will do that next year, which I highly doubt unless McLaren can crack the silver bullet for 2023. But yeah, great year for them overall. I think, there's not much to say they did wrong, or, they did what they could to finish where they did. I think, with a team like Mercedes, there's more faith in them to get things right for the next year than there would be for a Ferrari, because, they're genuinely just didn't know what went wrong, or they understood what went wrong and they tried engineering their way out of it, but it just didn't quite work out. So, for whatever reason, the W13, I guess 13, the lucky number for them, didn't seem so lucky in the end. I don't know what I was trying to get with that, but anyway, we'll move it on. Yeah, an interesting stat as well, thanks to Pirelli, for the overtakes for this season. There was a 31% increase overall between last year and this year. So, that shows you that, the ability to follow cars a lot closely with these ground effect machines has made a difference. Most of the overtaking we did see was in the midfield, sadly. So again, we're looking at the likes of Lando Norris, the Alpine drivers, Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso, because they were locked in a battle pretty much for the whole season, which, I've talked about through the year that, on pace, Alpine was the better car, better team. But McLaren, just Lando Norris's efforts in particular to get within the points gap that they did, was just incredible. And Norris actually finishing ahead of them in the championship as well, with 122 points to 92 points for Ocon and 81 for Alonso. Alonso, he's his own biggest fan, I think, when he says things like, I could have easily finished higher in the championship. This is how many points that I've lost because of incidents. And when you do look at that early part of the season, bad luck in Saudi, bad luck in Melbourne, bad luck in Imola, and then no points again in Miami as well. That's quite a big loss of points early on. And, there was that talk of him potentially getting pole position in Melbourne because he was quite quick in qualifying. So, shoulda, coulda, woulda at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter because it's done and dusted. But, I'm kind of disappointed that he's leaving Alpine to go to Aston Martin. Whether Aston Martin are going to be a team that, can give him what he didn't have at Alpine, but at the same time, they kind of built up to a point where, they're in a good position, in this new era of regulations, but now they've got to do the work again with two new drivers, or a new driver in Pierre Gasly next year, and that's going to bring with it its own challenges, given the fact that he and Ocon don't really get on. No podiums for Alpine either, despite them kind of being the fourth quickest car on occasion. Closest to that they got was fourth for Ocon in Japan, the fast that Japan was. Not going to talk about that just yet, but a bit later. I'm going to have my little rant about the FIA and Formula One as a whole. But Norris to be on the podium there in Imola, I think was an excellent thing. And, while we're talking about McLaren, why not give a big shout out to Andreas Seidel, who, as we know now, is departing straight away to head off to the Alfa Romeo Sauber team. He's going to be their CEO, of course, to be there in anticipation of the arrival of Audi in 2026. So, of course, his big ties with the Volkswagen Audi group, being team principal for Porsche and WEC. So, I think it's a big coup for the Sauber group to get someone like him on board. But, just a testament to the hard work he's done with McLaren since coming in 2019, to get 8 podiums, I think it is, the win as well in Monza with Ricciardo. It's just great. And hopefully, as Zach Brown has said, since promoting Andreas Stella to the team principal role for next year onwards, that, they just continue to stay the course, what Seidel has set for them, rather than trying to change away from that, because Seidel is a really great operator, and I'm just glad that Formula One was able to get him following WEC, because we've seen the benefit of his work at McLaren. There was, of course, rumours that he might end up at Ferrari, or Ferrari were approaching him, but then that was kind of moot, given the fact that he's now gone over to the Sauber group to head up the Audi project 2026 onwards. It still means that Alfa Romeo Sauber, or Sauber if you want to call them that, still need a team boss next year. So we'll wait and see how that all pans out. It'll be interesting who they pick now, but we'll just have to wait and see. And Williams as well in need of a team principal, given the departure of Jost Capito and his deputy in FX de Maison, the technical chief. So Daniel Ricciardo, what do I say more than what's already been said this season? He really just couldn't get a grip on the ornate McLaren. And what I will say is that Norris himself as well struggled with the car. So people who say, oh, they set up the car just for Norris, is absolute hogwash, because, he himself said that this car was not to his liking. So it is just a shame the way that the relationship between Ricciardo and McLaren panned out. We know how good Ricciardo is. I'm hoping that him stepping away from racing and being in that third driver role at Red Bull does reinvigorate him if he does get an opportunity in 2024. But, this could genuinely be it for him too. Like, maybe, he realises when he's in the simulator next year at Red Bull and doing some testing that he's genuinely lost his ability, which would be a great shame, because he, like I've said for many years, going back to 2014 when he first signed up for Red Bull and got those incredible wins in Canada and Hungary and Belgium, that this could be a future world champion would be looking at. And for an Aussie as well, it's the prospect of that was quite tasty, but unfortunately it's just not panned out that way. And, I can't see him being world champion now unless he does a Nigel Mansell miraculously, but while Max Verstappen is in that team, it's very much Max's team, and if Ricciardo does end up in that second seat again, he is going to be playing kind of second fiddle to Max, but we'll get to see more race wins, hopefully, like we're seeing from Perez in that position this year. Alpine, said what I needed to about them. Alonso, I don't know what he's doing going to Aston Martin. Ocon and Gasly next year will be quite interesting. But for me, a highlight of the season was, if we go down to Alfa Romeo, and they finished 6th in the championship, which is their best finish, I think, since 2012, believe it or not, which is going back a fair way. But Valtteri Bottas, I think, best thing he could have done was get himself out of Mercedes, rediscovering himself at a midfield team or lower-end midfield team like Alfa Romeo. He did get 5th earlier on in the season in Imola, and had a good weekend at the sprint as well, but that's kind of kept them afloat through the year. Aston Martin did tie on points with them, but because of that 5th from Bottas on countback, they had the better results overall. What do you say about the rookie Zhou Guanyu? Sorry, mate. What do you say about him? Just cruelled by misfortune and unreliability. He didn't really do much wrong himself, and it's quite rich, and I can be accused of being in that boat as well. At the end of last year, when it was announced that he would be taking that second seat at Alfa Romeo, that someone like Oscar Piastri deserved that seat over him. He's more talented, but with what he's done this year, has Joe, he hasn't done much wrong, and he's definitely warranted a place on the grid for the time being. It's very much a Nicholas Latifi kind of situation at the beginning. I was one of those people who wasn't as harsh on Latifi after the first year. Wait and see how he goes in the second year, and second year was pretty good for Latifi, scoring his first points and everything, but then this year he was absolutely rubbish, and I'm sure Williams has found a better driver in Logan Sargent, hopefully, so we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, give Joe the benefit of the doubt, we'll see how he goes for another year, whether he'll be around in 2026, even though that is quite a while away still. Whether he'll be around in 2026 for the Audi project, I doubt it. They'll probably want to high quality drivers, they're not going to need anything in terms of budget, or they won't need any pay drivers and whatnot. So yeah, for them to then come out with 2 great drivers, hopefully Bottas is around for there. I think he deserves a shot at that. But for this year, for 2022 at least, I think Joe's done a pretty good job. So, we'll see how he goes. Next year, Aston Martin, great, my favourite team. Still disappointing considering the investment from Lawrence Stroll, and, they're building their new base and everything, that the brand Aston Martin is only capable of infrequent points finishes. I think they got their car concept wrong at the start of the year, but were able to make some changes and get those developments in, which probably in previous years they haven't been able to do because of budget restrictions and whatnot. But operating in a cost cap era as well, they should do quite well moving forward. But, at the same time, when you've got Lance Stroll, who is very, very hit and miss with his results, he can be brilliant one weekend and then absolutely mess it up on another, and I'm looking at the US Grand Prix, for example, where, he just ran into Alonso and caused that big crash on the straight. And then in Brazil during the sprint race as well, putting Vettel in the wall, almost his teammate, that should have warranted a race ban. Yet we've got Pierre Gasly on 12 penalty points or whatever it is. So, that's a system again that hopefully they look into next year. Seb, unfortunately retiring at the end, or he has now retired from F1. So I think it is a bit of a sad way for him to finish his career, where he did very much peak, when he was at Red Bull. It was disappointing that, the Ferrari stint just didn't work out the way everyone would have liked it to have. But at the end of the day, he's done a pretty good job this year to get the points finishes he has been able to with the car he's had. Wish him all the best in retirement and with all the endeavours that he wishes to chase, in terms of raising awareness about climate change and, equality and all those things as well. And yeah, his family life as well is quite important. I understand that as well. So yeah, good job from Seb this year. Behind them, some disappointment for AlphaTauri to drop all the way to 9th. Ahead of them was Haas at the end of the day. And Magnussen, coming into the year, probably didn't even think that he'd be in F1 or be making a return to F1. But given what happened with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, what's-his-face ended up out of a drive, which was, needed, and then Magnussen, to take them to 5th on his return in Bahrain to Haas was incredible. So, and I say the same thing about Alex Albon as well, coming back after a year out, and with Williams, he's done some great races this year to get some points. The drive in Australia to finish 10th, where he was running 7th and then pitted on the final lap. Was able to take those hard tyres all the way to the final lap and then pit and still score a point was excellent. But it is a bit disappointing to see Williams still at the back of the grid despite, the investment from Doralton Capital, and then, of course, having someone like Jost Capito in charge and, new technical boss and Demise on as well. But as we know, that's changed, and what's going to happen next year remains to be seen. They've got a good driver lineup, probably not as experienced as others on the grid, given Albon is only a year back into F1, and then of course Sargent stepping up from F2. I still think it's probably the weakest of lineups on the grid, and I can't expect them, unless they do find some genuine car speed over their immediate rivals at the back of the grid, that they're going to be finishing any higher than they did this year. So, and that was last, sadly. Mick Schumacher, as much as I don't feel like he's quite cut out for, top tier F1, and maybe he could have needed another year to settle in and everything, the inconsistency, I guess, for a cash-strapped outfit like Haas probably wasn't good enough. As much as I'm a fan of Nico Hülkenberg, I think it's still a conservative choice to bring someone like him back in. Investing in Schumacher for another season, what's the worst that could have happened? It can't be any worse than this season, for example. So, I would have done it like that. But then again, I'm not Günther Steiner. I'm not as amazing as he is with the decision making like that. So, we just got to see how he goes, how Hulkenberg next year goes with Magnussen. They're both, proven midfield specialists, and if that does prove to work out, then we could see Haas move up a little bit in the championship from 8th or whatever to there's a potential of 6th there as well with Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin battling with them. AlphaTauri, just a year of inconsistency for them. They didn't really have the car pace at all to match their midfield rivals. Yuki Tsunoda, I think, did a decent job, to get what he could out of the car. If anything, if there's a moment that sums up their season, I think at Silverstone, when both their cars did a synchronized spin at the same corner, that kind of sums up their season. And as we know, Gasly is moving on to Alpine, so we'll see how he goes next year. And Nick de Vries is coming into the AlphaTauri team, the Formula E champion from last year. So with all the on-track stuff covered, really, all I've got left to say really about 2022 is just disappointment about, the lack of championship battle. So while the new regulations did achieve its objective of providing closer racing, just not having that championship fight was a bit disappointing. And that's not Formula One's fault. That's Ferrari's fault and Mercedes' fault for not being there. But then at the same time, the managing of the cost cap saga for Red Bull, where they were found to have been in minor breach of the cost cap regulations last year, for them to only be fined and then given a 10% reduction in aero testing for the next 12 months, was a bit of a slap to the face, I think, given that certainly I came into this cost cap era of F1 with optimism that, Formula One and the FIA are going to start policing this stuff a lot better. They're going to crack down on, teams getting what they want. There's no more throwing the toys out of the cot. You do it our way or you just, you bugger off kind of thing. But then for Red Bull to get a fine for, spending too much money last year, there's a reason why they spend that money, is because they've got the money to spend. So, it makes no sense that, you get a fine. And 10%, we'll see whether 10% reduction in their testing is going to make a difference. They certainly think they do, but then the likes of Mercedes, Toto Wolff, they don't think so. So we'll just have to see. Japan as well, the Japanese Grand Prix, the confusion over the points situation as well. Yeah, they were supposedly, these were the new regulations after what happened in, in Spa last year. But, at the same time, nobody had any idea what was going on. And that's, what, is it Formula One's fault? Yes, because it was their job to communicate what points were going to be awarded, what race distance we had completed and all that sort of stuff. There was none of that whatsoever. And given the sensitivity around last year's outcome in Abu Dhabi, I thought, for their own sakes, for the sakes of their own brand reputation, that F1 and the FIA would put its best foot forward, demonstrate that this is the premier open wheel category in world motorsport and that it's got its house in order. Now I'm just reading from the article I wrote at the end of the year. But, issues such as the wearing of correct underwear and jewelry ended up making up the headlines early on in the year when we had two race directors in Niels Vittich and Eduardo Freitas. But the fact that these situations played out as they did was quite dissatisfying. I'm a little bit, it is a little bit jarring in a way that because Formula One is commercially in a golden period, demand is outweighing the supply, that they kind of can feel like they get away with whatever they want because they've got enough of a audience that perhaps don't care about these issues as much as traditionalist fans such as myself and other people that I know would be upset with, the human rights issues. Sports washing, of course, is a whole thing at the moment with the World Cup on in Qatar at the moment. So, the fact that Formula One wants to go to countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, having 3 races in the US next year as well with the glitz of the Las Vegas Grand Prix. I think, as a spectacle, it should be great, but is it going to put on a good race? I don't know. we'll see. Miami was not very spectacular race at the end of the day. So, it's that shift away from, the circuits that we loved going to, circuits that actually provide good racing, to these destination type races, which I think is not going to be good for Formula One in the long term, because Formula E does it. They go to all those destination cities. They race in New York, London, Paris, whatever. Now I've got the Madonna. I've got the EUM for Madonna. But F1, that's its USP, is that it goes to some of the best circuits in the world, your Spas, your Monzas, your Silverstones and whatnot. And yet, this year there was a possibility that Spa could have dropped off, and that would have been really sad. It would have been a tragedy. Where's the German Grand Prix? We've got two awesome circuits in Germany. Why not use them? Portimao was excellent. The last couple of years we used them. Used the Portuguese track, Turkey. Next year we've got a situation where the Chinese Grand Prix has been cancelled, which leaves like a 4-week gap between Australia and the next race in Baku. Why not try and organise something in Malaysia? Because Sepang is such an awesome track. Yes, they struggled to get crowds there at the end before they eventually canned that Grand Prix, but that's also because of the cost of it. MotoGP was much cheaper, and Malaysian motorsport fans seem to like motorcycle racing more. So, it's about making effort. If they made the effort in those areas, I think, they would get the audience. And it's a bit sad that Kyle Army didn't quite come off for 2023, but hopefully for 24 we'll see it. And why F1, even made the effort to try and go to China next year, even though nothing has really changed in the last 12 months with their situation and being in perennial lockdown. Well, who knows that? But yeah, I guess next year will be telling, with the big 23 race schedule, whether the sanctions laid down on Red Bull for the cost cap by the FIA will have an impact or not. Because, it is quite sad when people like Toto Wolff are saying, if, it doesn't really make a difference for Red Bull, then it's in all the big teams' interest to make a minor breach of the cost cap if it means they win the championship. And that kind of defeats the efforts of the likes of Ross Brawn, who also retired at the end of this year, stepping down from his role as one of the big bosses in F1. It defeats the purpose and the efforts of his, or defeats the efforts of him. Also Chase Carey as well, because I feel like when Chase Carey was in charge, there wasn't this sort of stuff going on that there is this year under Stefano Domenicali, sadly. Given the fact that Domenicali's got a history in F1 and, would be quite close to a lot of teams and team bosses and all that. Carey, I'm sure, would have been a lot more blunt and diplomatic and not really giving a lot of bias in that sort of situation. It kind of did leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth at times this season, more so than what happened in Abu Dhabi last year, purely because, 2022, the new regulations, cost cap and all that was supposed to remedy all the things that F1 was failing in up until now. But, we haven't really had that fully happen yet, but there is still time. I still have hope. I'm hoping that next year can be great. The sport can continue to flourish and we don't have as much of these controversies moving forward, particularly from the FIA and Formula One side. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. And I can't really think of anything much more to say. I've already covered off the big team principal merry-go-round or whatever, so, that's pretty much that. Whatever news does come out then between now and the new year, I'll cover off next year when we get there. Other than that, I want to say a big thank you to all my listeners. As always this year, it's been a challenging year for me, as some of you close to me might know. Stuff going on with family and, some horrible news in the middle of the year as well, having to go through that. So, and that was kind of my point where I realised that perhaps all this racing stuff isn't as important as, we think it is. I see the passion and some of the hate on social media in particular. I'm not here for that at all. There's more things to life than, making your point heard on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I'm talking about what I love, and sometimes in a critical way as well, on this platform, because I feel safe. If people want to engage with me, they're more than welcome. I'm not going to deny them that opportunity, but this is my release, and I do it in a way where it isn't hateful or vicious or digging into each other's fan bases and stuff like that. So that's one thing that I wish that next year we can see a bit less of, is some of the vitriol and hate that's on social media. And I know that's asking a lot, but it's really sad, because I've loved Formula One for decades now, and it's never been this bad. The social commentary and the fandom and whatnot, it's never been this hateful and distasteful as well. But I don't want to end on a positive. Don't want to end on a positive note. I do want to end on a positive note. So yeah, hopefully next year it will be a bit different. We'll see some more kind of things being said overall. But until then, thank you very much, everyone. Happy holidays. Stay safe wherever you are in the world. Be sure to follow the Twitter account at Hit the Apex Media. Also, there'll be a link through to Instagram and Raw as well, which have written my end of year Formula One season review piece. So check that out. Other than that, check out Grid Talk as well, F1 Grid Talk podcast. On all the different platforms they are. I'll be doing one final show for them for the year as well this weekend, so keep an eye out for that. But other than that, take care, stay safe, thank you, and we'll see you in 2023.